Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I am your host Deepak. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Geoffrey Moore with us today. Dr. Geoffrey Moore is a renowned consultant, best-selling author, and public speaker with over 35 years of experience in the high-tech sector. As an author, Dr. Moore has published 7 best-selling books addressing the marketing, strategy, and organizational challenges that are triggered by disruptive innovations. His book, Crossing the Chasm, a classic in the field, has sold over 1 million copies and remains influential. Dr. Geoffrey Moore has served as an advisor to CEOs and executive teams of some of the most iconic high-tech companies, including Salesforce, Microsoft, Adobe, Autodesk, Cisco, and HP. Dr. Moore delivers 20 to 40 keynote speeches annually. Wow! Focusing on thought leadership around the impact of emerging technologies on industries. His influential phrases such as chasm, tornadoes, and systems of engagement have become integral to high-tech language and strategy. Dr. Moore holds a bachelor's degree from Stanford University and a PhD from University of Washington. After teaching English at Olivet College, he transitioned to sales and marketing in the high-tech industry, later co-founding the Chasm Group, Chasm Institute, and TCG Advisors, where he is chairman emeritus. In this episode, Dr. Moore will offer valuable insights from his acclaimed book, The Infinite Staircase: What the Universe Tells Us About Life, Ethics, and Mortality. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Geoffrey Moore to our podcast, where we look forward to gaining valuable insights from his expertise on the topic. Dr. Geoffrey Moore, it's a true delight to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, Deepak, and thank you for that very kind introduction.
Yeah. Dr. Moore, what inspired you to write The Infinite Staircase, and how has your own journey through various fields of study informed the ideas presented in the book?
It's really, this book is sort of the culmination of 30 or 40, maybe even 50 years of reading. I wrote it for my doctorate in English literature. I wrote a dissertation, which was called Strategies for Living, book about strategies for living. And it's based on reading a lot of science work. There was a time in my life where I read a ton about Darwinism, then astrology, and then there was a whole decade I spent with molecular biology. So there are all these really, really interesting science stories, but they were all kind of in compartments. So the molecular biology was over here, and the astrophysics was over here, and the Darwinism was over there. And I'm coming to I'm 78 years old. I'm kind of in legacy mode. I thought I'd like to try to pull all this together into a single narrative about how did we get from the Big Bang to you and I talking on this podcast without any divine intervention. And this is not a book against religion at all. It just said, look, if we want to tell the secular story, how would that work? And so that was what led to this story, to the book.
In The Infinite Staircase, you take readers on a journey from the Big Bang to modern ethical action. Can you explain the metaphor of the infinite staircase and how it ties together such as diverse fields as physics, biology, and the humanities?
Sure. Wow. Okay. Well, so again, if I go all the way back to that dissertation, there was in the Renaissance, they had a vision of the universe called the Great Chain of Being. And it started with divine God, and it went down through angels and archangels and humanity, and then animals and vegetables and to earth. And it was like like a staircase. The difference is the secular story goes the other direction. It starts at the bottom of the staircase and builds up. So it starts with physics, and that's where it begins. And then and basically for the first, 100, I don't know how many hundred thousands of years, the universe from the Big Bang, it was just physics. There wasn't even chemistry at that time because you couldn't get electrons to hang out with protons. The universe was just too hot. But then chemistry evolved out of physics, and then we came to the planet Earth, and amazingly, biology emerged out of chemistry. And so that the bottom half of so this is the idea here is in each layer we're going to have things emerge. There's 11 stairs in my staircase, so I'll tell you about the rest of them in a second. But the idea is each layer or each level relies on what's below it, but also brings in its own reality. So every stair in the staircase has its own rules that are local to its stair. It certainly is highly influenced by the rules below it, and it exerts influence on the stairs above it. So we've done physics, chemistry, biology, and we would actually be done except for the fact that somewhere along the line we became conscious. And consciousness creates a whole different sense of what's going on. So that middle stairs of the staircase start with biology. Well, how did you get from biology to consciousness? And I propose we got there through the mechanism of desire. That the living things, particularly as they became more complex, desired to reproduce, desired to keep themselves alive, survival of the fittest. And out of that desire came this experimenting with the world, going out into the world. And consciousness emerges gradually as just a good trick. It's a great way for you to win a battle of either natural selection or sexual selection. So it just came into being from the bottom up. Now that's great, and that can get you to fruit flies and frogs and whatever. It doesn't really feel like consciousness the way you and I would talk about it. And so, but I added two more steps before we got to language, which is kind of where humans depart from everybody else. The first step, right after consciousness, was values. And I said, look, values come from being mammals. If you look at how mammals raise their children, every one of us, you and I included, were nurtured. We were essentially loved for the first 2 years of our life, or we wouldn't be alive. We can't survive without being nurtured. So we internalize. Every mammal begins life with love, whether they think about it that way or not. And so the early values, and then mammals also organize around tribes or communities or packs or wolves or whatever it is, but there's usually an alpha leader. And so we also learn a kind of a discipline and a deference to authority. And so again, respecting your elders, we think of these as like coming down from above, but I'm suggesting no, they come from below. That in any community of mammals, there will be an alpha leader, and they will show respect. So the idea of the values of love and of respect came before language. Also, what comes before language is is culture in the sense of imitation. So what culture lets a social group do is transmit its learnings about how to survive through imitation. So birds imitate other birds, and chimpanzees imitate other chimpanzees. Dogs imitate other dogs. They learn how to beg. They learn how to, they learn how to get along. Whatever it is, culture is transmitted not just genetically. See, prior to culture, it's just all genes. It's just genes. But with culture, you can actually evolve strategies. And so birds learn how to, drop mollusks on rocks, and chimpanzees fish with twigs, and I mean they learn tools, and that's a cultural transmission. That's not genetic, because some groups learn it and other groups don't learn it, so it's cultural. But the big thing is when language comes in, and once you get language, now the ability to transmit ideas is just, well, look, we're on a podcast, right? There's a book behind you. I mean it's just an amazingly huge leap up. And so I talk about language and how language evolved and where it came from. But again, it came from strategies. Basically, language is designed to help people with strategic behavior, strategically understand the world and manipulate the world in ways to get things that they need or want. So the last three stairs were then on top of language. There was narratives, because I make the claim that storytelling is our fundamental way of understanding the world. We tell stories to little kids. We internalize stories. After a while, our own life becomes like a story, like an autobiography. You can think about yourself as a character in multiple stories. Your own story, your spouse's story, your parents' story, your children's story. We have these, and if we see each other every day, we say, hey, what'd you do today? How was your day? We tell a story. Oh, what's your business plan? We tell a story, right? Should I invest? We tell a story. And so the last two then are analytics and theory. And the reason that you need analytics is some of the stories are not very credible. And so analytics tests the story to say, is this really true? Does the Earth really circle? Does the sun circle around the Earth, or does the Earth circle around the sun? Well, for a long time with Ptolemy, we thought it was the sun was circling the Earth. With Copernicus, we applied some analytics. No, it's the Earth circling the sun. So in science and in social sciences, and even in literary criticism or political criticism, we're just always testing for truth. Just try to say, well, okay, Now, if you try to put this all together, and that's where the staircase came. The staircase is my theory of the universe, for what it's worth, is it started with the Big Bang and it emerged up through these 11 layers. I'm not saying there couldn't be other layers, but these are, I think, the right ones to think about. And so that was the first 2/3 of the book. And that was just to say, how did we get here? And then, as you point out, the last third was about, well, what do we do now? But I'll stop. That was a very long answer. I apologize.
Very insightful, Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore, you mentioned in your book you tackle two fundamental human questions. The first one is, where do I fit in the grand scheme of things? And second, how should I behave? Which religion traditionally answered for many. So how does your framework-based approach offer alternative answers in our increasingly secular world?
Yeah, I think this is important because it's very important that our ethics have some authorization. We can't just sort of appear. And it used to be you had sacred text, like the Bhagavad Gita, or like in the Zen texts from Zen Buddhism, or the Confucian texts, or the Bible, or the Quran, or whatever. And by the way, up until about 200 years ago, that was the only way to make sense of anything. I mean, we didn't understand about biology. We didn't understand about evolution. We didn't genetics. We had none of that. We had no astrobiology. We had none of that. But as you point out, in the last 200 years, we now have a very credible story that is not divinely around divine creation. So, okay, how do we make that work? Well, in that story, we're sitting here. First of all, we're mammals. I mean, I think that you start with that. We're mammals. Therefore, the mammalian values of nurturing children, love for each other, respect for elders, those kinds of things, that's wired into us. And I think that's part of the way we want to live our lives. But because of consciousness and because we want meaning, we want significance in our life, we want to align ourselves with causes or goals or whatever it is that we see, with values that allow us to attribute, significance to our actions. And that significance comes from us. It comes from the stories we tell. But these are very special stories. They're not sacred, but they're kind of filling the same role that a sacred text would fill in religion. I have a life vision, or I have maybe I want to leave a legacy, or I want to have impact, in a situation where I want to make the world better for me being here. Or I want my family to be happier, or whatever it is. We all have different trajectories, but the trajectory is carried by a story that we ultimately commit to and say, I'm going to live out this story. I want to act like this character in this story, and that's how it works.
You draw on science, physics, chemistry, and biology to help shape ethical decision making. So how do the laws of nature inform your perspective on how humans should behave in their personal and professional lives?
It's interesting. I think the laws of nature, well, other than the values I've talked about, I think it's actually more the laws of culture. So what happens when you expose culture to language is now you start creating a bunch of the artifacts of culture, including religion, by the way. But you also create justice. You create a sense of fairness. We have the values of kindness and fairness, and then I talk about four values, the four sources of value: kindness and fairness, both of which are interpersonal. And we tend to be kind, especially to people that we know personally. So I talk about kindness as the domain of I and you. You and we know each other, we're being kind. Fairness is actually a way of dealing with people you don't know, but you want to be on good terms with, and you don't want to have to fight with. So fairness is saying, actually, I'm going to be impersonal. So kindness is about being personal, but fairness is about being more impersonal. And those are both local. They don't scale. But when we try to scale them, we get to the domains of what I call morality and justice. So morality is trying to take the interpersonal thing and taking it all the way up to typically a religion, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any community that shares values. But what morality says is, I will abide by these values, and that is my commitment to the community. And I'm committing to be moral. And the community is going to evaluate my behavior relative to the morals of the community that I've committed to. Again, that works within a community, but no community has the right to impose their morals on another community. That's where we get to the world of justice. So justice says, well, we got to have some way of organizing people that aren't, you have many, many communities with divided interests. So justice is a political, state-run set of things that says, look, we have law, we're going to have laws and we're going to play by rules. And we call that legal justice. And legal justice, rule of law, is like really, really important for preserving all four of the domains of kindness, fairness, morality, and justice. And then I talk about a complication in justice. In fact, it's a complication that we just played out yesterday in the United States elections, between legal justice, which is obey the letter of the law and keep it minimal, and that's all we do, and what we call social justice, which is no, we need to intervene to help the disadvantaged or work, allow people who have been discriminated against or whatever. And what happens, and when I talk about this in the chapter on justice, there's a tension between legal justice, which is minimal, and social justice, which is maximal. And I think that what the United States electorate said yesterday was we had gone too far to the side of social justice, and we're going to pull back. And that's what you're going to see in the United States over the next 4 years. Not my wish. That was not my vote, but that's what I think we're going to see.
Dr. Moore, mortality is a central theme in your work. So how do the scientific and ethical frameworks you explore in the Infinite Staircase provide guidance for individuals grappling with the reality of mortality?
Yeah, I think grappling with mortality is kind of mortality in a secular story plays the same role as immortality in a religious story. So if you think about it, if you're committed to a religious view of the life, and there's such a thing as eternal life, that's a big deal, right? I mean, your eternal life. I mean, that's gonna focus a whole lot of how you behave and your values if you take it seriously. I think part of the sadness of contemporary cultures, I think people say the words, but they don't behave in a way that. I mean, you look at the way people behave, you think, really? You think that's gonna get you eternal rewards? You should be more careful. But anyway, so that's the immortality side. The mortality side is, no, this is it. This is not a dress rehearsal. This is our life. We get this much time. And so the question then becomes, what do you want to do with it? How are you going to create meaning? And as I said, my belief is you create meaning by finding stories that you can personally resonate with, that resonate with you, that you can say, yes, that sounds like me. And by the way, there's a role that I can play. And I'm going to play that role because I think that's the right thing for me to do. But literally, I mean, Shakespeare had this thing about all the world's a stage, and everybody's a player on the stage. Well, I kind of think that's the deal. So, and by the way, I read a lot of Shakespeare, so I probably was influenced by him.
Dr. Moore, as a high-tech strategist, you have advised many organizations on disruptive innovations. So how do you see the ethical frameworks from your book applying to decisions around emerging technologies?
It's really an interesting question. I think we talk about when we talk about ethics, we talk about defining goodness in three different ways. So there's what we call it feels good, works good, is good. So feels good is, hey, it's pleasurable. So if you think about the Epicurean philosophy, they said your pleasure was we should live for pleasure. Pleasure is the ultimate value. Okay, so I'll call that feels good. Works good is the one that says, hey, this is a good trick. It may not be moral, it may actually be immoral, but it works really, really well. And I'm going to come back to that because this is where technology comes. Technology is a good trick. It's amoral. And then there's is good, which is the framework of morality and altruism and helping others. So if you go back to disruptive innovations is the realm of good tricks. Well, good tricks are very interesting. First of all, they're powerful, so they give us more leverage. So if they are put in service to is good, then that's a very powerful addition. But if they were put in service to is not good, or and it might be pleasure, but it might just be power. I think you can see a lot of people using technology to become more powerful. Authoritarian states, supervising their citizenry, and people, criminals using phishing and whatever. There's an enormous amount of technology that can be used for very, very bad outcomes. So technology itself is amoral. which means now you need, and particularly now with AI, we're seeing right now, I'm currently talking to you from the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in San Francisco because I'm attending an offsite with Salesforce. Well, Salesforce has a chief ethics officer, very focused right now on AI. In fact, last week I led a panel with another Deepak, the Deepak Deepak Chopra, who writes all the books, all the self-help books. He was on the panel with Paula Goldman, who's Salesforce's ethics AI officer. And there were a lot of people in the room, and the questions were all about AI is clearly a good trick. How do we make sure it isn't used in service to do good and not in service to do harm?
Many people still turn to religion for meaning and guidance. How do you think your secular science-based approach to ethics and existence will resonate with individuals who have been guided by religious frameworks?
So I mean, look, in a secular world, this is really important because I think the secular story got co-opted by people who were adamantly atheistic, and I mean, like they were against religion. They just react very negatively to it. My whole literary career was in the medieval and Renaissance literature. There was no literary work that was not permeated with religion. So I think what a secular person would say is religious texts can be extremely wise and helpful, and certainly can give you good guidance on how to behave. The one thing a secular person will say, though, is they cannot be sacred. To me, they can be sacred. There can be a community can declare them sacred, but a secular person would say, no, they're not sacred. And the reason that's important, and this is where there's a little bit of there's something to manage if you're going to be religious. Sacred texts cannot be changed, right? The whole point of a sacred text is you do not change it. Well, the world has changed an enormous amount. And so we have this secular story, which changes daily, weekly, monthly, and you have a sacred story which can't be changed. At some point, the connection between the two becomes very, very hard to maintain. But if you just say, look, I'm going to treat it as a narrative, and remember, for me, narrative is the center of everything. So I'm all in on narrative. If you treat it as a narrative, it's like, yeah, that's a very, very powerful narrative. And you can live your whole life living out that narrative. I would like to live the way Jesus wanted me to, or the way Buddha wanted me to, or the way Krishna wanted me to. That's fine.
Dr. Moore, in the book you mentioned building a metaphorical ladder that connects various fields of knowledge. Can you elaborate on how climbing this ladder helps individuals form a coherent understanding of their place in the universe?
Yeah, I don't know that you have to climb the ladder because I think the ladder's already, I think we inherit the ladder. When we come into the universe, these layers of reality are there. Physics is there, chemistry is there, biology is there, desire is there, consciousness is there, language is there, value. I mean, it's all there. What I think I think what's important about the staircase is the idea of, look, each stair in the staircase inherits things from below and influences things above. But you build the staircase from the bottom up. You don't build it from the top down, which is really, that's probably the biggest contradiction with religion. Because I think virtually all religious texts that I'm familiar with sort of start at the top and come down. And I'm saying, no, that's not how the world works. It actually works the other way. You emerge upward, you do not devolve downward. And so that's the biggest change in the two things. And I think what's important about that then is to say, to understand the world well, you need to understand what stair am I looking at and make sure I'm understanding the rules that stair abides by. So how do values work? How does culture work? How does language work? How does narrative work? How do analytics work? And not try to devalue. Like, for example, the idealist would say, well, the only thing that really matters is the top of the staircase, and everything else is kind of muck. And a materialist would say the opposite. The only thing that matters is the bottom of the staircase, and everything up is kind of like epiphenomenal. And so I want to say, no, both of you, no, the staircase, reality has these layers, and you need to respect each layer and engage with it. And that's why I wanted to write the book, because I felt like these stairs, they were like lying around, but they hadn't been stacked. I wanted to just put them in a staircase stack. Yeah.
Dr. Moore, my last question. What practical everyday advice do you hope readers will take away from the infinite staircase, particularly when it comes to ethical behavior in a world filled of uncertainty?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we live in a world of. I mean, the staircase is very probabilistic, and the higher you go, the more probabilistic. I think that first, I do think it's important from this book. If you embrace this book, you'd say, "I want you to embrace your mortality." And by the way, we're wired to fear death, so it's not like that's an easy thing to do. I mean, evolution taught us to fear death. But one of the points I make in the book is that if there were no death, there would be no evolution, because natural selection requires, right? And if there was no evolution, there'd be no us. I mean, we wouldn't be here. So you can't really demonize death, but that doesn't mean that you know how to deal with it. It doesn't know, particularly doesn't help you necessarily deal with your own death or the death of a loved one, both of which can be, overwhelming. But what I'd like people to do is to find a way to come to terms with that so that they can make the most out of the time we're here. And as mammals, I think that's, I'm back into the thing. I want to give back to the tribe. I want to nurture the young. I mean, I was a teacher. I'm still a teacher, right? It's just about, and so are you, by the way. So if I'm a reader of the book, I think what I would want to take away is I need to pay attention to the narrative that I'm going to live by and not give lip service to a narrative that I don't really believe in. Because sooner or later, life will challenge us very, very starkly. And so at that point, we need to have a foundation that can push back against the challenges that life will put in front of us. But when you need it, it's too late to build it. So I would like people to build it in times of peace, as it were, because when you're at war with life, you need an army, you need a foundation, and so yes, I think find the stories the stories, and again they could be religious stories, they can be any stories, but find your role in it, and then commit to that role, and then live the role. I mean, I think living the role, so that gives coherence to your life.
Thank you for joining us today on this insightful episode with Dr. Geoffrey Moore. It's been a pleasure to hear his thoughts on his latest book, The Infinite Staircase, What the Universe Tells Us About Life, Ethics and Mortality, and to explore his profound perspective on the intersection of science, philosophy and ethics. To all our listeners, we hope today's discussion has sparked new ideas and provided valuable takeaways that will resonate with you long after this episode. Thank you once again, Dr. Geoffrey Moore, for his time and insights. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. Thank you so much, Dr. Geoffrey Moore, for joining with us.
Well, thank you, Deepak. It was a pleasure to do so.